Wonderful. So we are excited to have Richard Zerba and Faith Ocullet from Zircom International here on our webinar today to talk with us about East Africa. This is our fourth webinar in a five-part series on the continent of Africa. If you missed our other webinars on Africa, they are in your MySesta account under past webinars, or you could reach out to me if you can't find them or need help with that. But a very interesting look at the continent. We've broken it out into the different regions, which vary considerably. But today we're excited to hear about East Africa. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Richard and Faith.
Great, and thank you, everybody. We're looking forward to presenting to you on actually the fastest growing region in the world. And so we've got a lot to tell you. And I'd like to introduce Faith Ocullet, who is our agricultural program manager who covers all of Africa for our state regional trade groups, and looking forward to working with you. Our key point of contact for SUSTA is actually in Florida right now. Cephas is working with the Miami Food and Beverage Trade Show, where we brought some African buyers in to meet with American exporters, and looking forward to that. So Cephas isn't here with us today, but he's busy there in the United States. He's mostly seated in Ghana. So Faith, maybe I'll just like to introduce you.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks, Danielle. I'm happy to be here. My name is Faith Ocullet. I've been with Zircom for about 9.5, going on 10 years now, and I'm based in Nairobi, Kenya. Actually originally from Uganda, so I cover East Africa actually quite well. So yeah, I'm excited. The potential that's there and the opportunity that the region presents for U.S. suppliers.
Great. So I'm going to start with sharing, and then we'll be Faith and I will be bouncing off of each other as we go through the presentation. And if there's anything that you need to ask questions about, we'll be glad to just entertain those at the end of the presentation. But we'll start right now. So I'm going to get things rolling here. Okay. Faith, do you see that?
Yes, we do.
Okay, perfect. Okay. Just as a reminder, this is a slide that represents where our staff are. So we do have staff all over Africa, a very large and engaging staff, full of experienced people who can help you getting into every market, every decent big country market in Africa, and many of the small or medium-sized ones. So we're a team that has worked for, our company has experience having opened up in January 1999 and representing state government interests since then, but with a very strong agribusiness component and a very keen interest on helping American companies to be successful in the African continent. And this is always a slide I like to show with almost every presentation that we do. Africa used to be not a very large market. Back in the 1950s, it was about 5% of the world's population and a very small fraction of the total global economy. But now, Africa is about 18% of the world's population, and by the end of the century, it will be possibly over 40% of the world's population. So this is something that we have to be mindful of, and we're going to talk a bit about the demographics of the market, because demographics with agriculture mean a lot. The more mouths we have to feed, the more and the more money that they have to buy what goes into those mouths results in creating export markets. And we want to make sure that you're quite aware of what's happening in the African market as it develops and becomes more strategically important. Just a quick guide to where the fastest markets in the world are presently. And we see that Macau, which is a small former Portuguese enclave on the coast of China, is one of the fastest growing markets there. We also, and that's because of infrastructure build there. They're doing quite a lot. Guyana is actually growing somewhere close to 50 or 40% right now. That's in the Caribbean, another area that we're a bit engaged in. And we can see that as we go through the list, of the top 20 growing economies in the world, 12 of them are in Africa and 5 are in East Africa. So this means that East Africa has a preponderant um, share of the top 20 national economies. And it's not because, as people often say, well, they're starting at a low base. The low base started 20 years ago. So Africa has been consistently, parts of Africa, and particularly East Africa, have been consistently in the top market um, GDP growth of the world economy over and over and over. And if you have growth at about 7% a year, you're doubling your economy every decade. And so, with a country like Kenya or Tanzania or Rwanda, which have been approximating those growths, we've seen that those economies have expanded significantly. And then, if we look at East Africa as it's compared to other regions of Africa, we see that in 2024, projected growth will be close to 6% on average in the region. So this makes it a very fast-growing economy. And people always say, well, yeah, but that's tied to demographics. Well, the demographics account for about 2% of that. And so the real growth is about 4%, and maybe 3.5 or 4% on top of that. So we have one of the fastest growing markets here at your fingertips, and it's a very accessible market. And we're going to tell you why it's very accessible just as we go through the presentation. And once more, we've got some of the different growth patterns that have happened in the different regions of Africa, and we can see that we're estimating close to 6% regional growth. All things considered, the world is in a lot of turmoil right now, but all things considered, we're looking at 6%, close to 6% right now in the region of East Africa. So just what is one of the key things for you to know is what I showed in that animated slides. Africa is growing and it's growing very quickly. The rest of the world has a population that is diminishing, and in some places it's diminishing to the point of creating a national crisis. And so a market like China, in 50 years, China could go from close to 1.4 billion people to 750 million. And as you might know, countries like Korea, Italy, other places, even Brazil has a very low birth rate now relative to the current population. And so we're looking at the United States will likely remain stable with its population, but other markets are going to be diminishing very quickly with a very um, with an average age that's quite old, particularly Europe, East Asia, but Africa is a standout market. And so, as you're considering strategic plays for the long term, Africa has to be in your sights because it is an important market. Just very quickly, if we look at the demographics of some of a few of the East African countries that are very traditional ones for the United States. We have Kenya, we have Tanzania, Uganda, and Rwanda. We see that Uganda actually has one of the youngest average ages in the world at 16.7. And so we also see that other countries are below 20. All of them in East Africa are below 20. And Africa has an average age of 19.5 years old, which is very young. And if you consider other markets where you might consider more traditional markets. For example, Germany has an average age of about 46. South Africa is a bit older. South Africa is 26 years old. So it's the older one of the older cousins to these markets. Maybe Faith, if maybe you could comment on the importance of having such a young culture relative to the United States, because Africa really is a young place, and some of your insights from on the ground in Nairobi might be helpful here.
Yeah, no, I think for Uganda that actually should be 15 and not 16.6, 16.7, but
Yeah.
it's just a reflection of the region. It's I mean there's a number of young people and the population is growing again and average in the average age there's a lot of the workforce who previously would leave or go for further studies out of the country. We're seeing a lot of them now coming back and giving back, so to speak. But yeah, there's the middle class is growing, and part of that also is just coming from this
Mhm.
young population that we have in the region.
Yeah. And interestingly, Uganda is not, I mean, it was always considered the poor sister country to Kenya. But what has happened recently in Uganda in terms of its economy? Maybe some comments, because Uganda is going to be a standout country in the next years, isn't it?
Yeah, I think just because of, I mean, Kenya definitely is the hub, and I think a lot of that is due to it's now considered a low to middle income country. And so because of that term, the other countries that are more inland, Uganda or Burundi, were seen sort of as the younger siblings to Kenya, but we're seeing a lot of growth that's happening out of all the countries in the region. We're seeing, particularly for Rwanda, Uganda, Ethiopia, we're seeing that growth is the one that's sort of pushing up that average to 6 in terms of GDP. And because of the country is opening up to business, to international business, access to there's a lot of developments that's happening with infrastructure. And once you have your infrastructure that's getting better, then you're able to have access to more goods and so
Mhm.
those are some of the factors that are contributing.
Mhm. I was just thinking that some of the largest gold finds in the world have been recently located in Uganda, and some of the largest petroleum finds. So it's going to be interesting to see how the economy responds. A young population, but with the potential to become maybe not the United Arab Emirates. Maybe that's the wrong analogy, but there's a lot of potential there. And we're seeing some countries like Guinea, in West Africa, Namibia in Southern Africa, Uganda in East Africa, um, which have resource bases that, because the infrastructure is only just starting to get in there to extract these things, we're going to see very, very fast growth. And so I'm guessing that Uganda will likely see growth of 9 or 10% in the coming couple of years. But we do see very, very fast growth. And if you live in these countries, the change in these countries is very fast indeed. Not just that uh, there are a lot more people, but that a lot more people have a lot more resources. They're becoming more affluent, and they're able to purchase the kind of foods that are being exported from the United States. So we're seeing this as an important aspect of the market. And if we look at overall the comparative demographics, by about 2030, Africa will be creating the largest workforce in the world. And by the end of the century, most of the world's workers or labor force will be coming from Africa, if you can imagine that. So Africa is becoming strategically very important, and we're seeing this reflected in strategic policy, not only of the United States, but of most of the rest of the world, in terms of where Africa's sitting, the kinds of attention it's getting. It's not getting just developmental attention, of course, now, but business attention. And there's a lot of trends that are happening in relation to this. So we're seeing this trend that's on this graph exemplified in the economies right now. The East African economy is really hallmarked by the East African community, and there's a lot of importance that has been built around this group. The history of this group, it it started with the three countries of Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda after they gained independence, and each of them had a very they had a very close filial tie. They're all interrelated countries. Maybe Faith, if you can go back to your old high school lessons and tell us just a bit about how this group formed. And I see that the Congo is in there too. What has happened in terms of the growth of this group?
Yeah, you're right. So it began with just Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. Also, there's a lot of relation in terms of what you were saying. There's a majority of the Bantu in terms of tribes. So Bantu, Nilotic, those are the two main tribes, and sort of coming out from that region. And so you even find that there's language similarities. The national language in Kenya is Swahili, but that's the same case in Tanzania. And you do have a number of Ugandans now, just because of how close they are to each other, that do speak Swahili. But the different languages that are spoken with the different tribes, there's a lot of similarities, and people can understand each other just because of that Bantu and Nilotic history. But I think because of how the ties that were forming, and the benefits in terms of trade that did happen between the three countries, then the EAC, now the community, started growing. And slowly the other countries joined in with Rwanda and Burundi, and then Congo. I think Ethiopia as well is now part of the EAC. And so it's because of, I think a lot of that is due to the trade and the benefits that are contributing. So when one country now makes a decision, for example, with agreements, then it's sort of then benefits the rest of the group.
Mhm. And importantly to notice, if you look at the size of the region, it's not small. It's actually uh, a bit bigger than Western Europe. And so we're not talking about a small market. That, if you were to look at East Africa, it really could reach from Portugal to Moscow and from Sweden down to Tunisia, as we can see on this map. If you look at that world map as in real size. So it's important to understand that we're talking about a very big region, about 400 million people. There's some countries that are edging toward um, uh, upper middle class, or sorry, middle class, and others are still very low in terms of income levels, which would be South Sudan and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. But Kenya, for most purposes, would be considered a very developed country, and it's still growing. And other countries like Rwanda growing very quickly and being based on a knowledge economy. So there's a big mix of um, of lifestyles because of differentials in the income. Does this create any differences between the markets, Faith? And tell me, if you come into East Africa, how do you treat these vast differences when you're coming in looking for a distributor, for example?
I think also a lot of it comes from culturally based, because that has a factor in terms of how business is done. Africans generally are very relational, not as transactional. But when you break it down between the countries, you do see the based off of that culture and the history, some countries being a lot more transactional than others. So, for example, and this is generally speaking, go to Tanzania, um, Kenyans would have their opinion that the business is a bit slow, and because I know a lot of the country is and a lot of the business is done on the coastline, and just because of that feeling is that business the way business happens is a bit slower, whereas if you're in Kenya, they tend to move a bit faster. Ugandans are generally known as, and these are opinions between East Africans, right? So Ugandans are generally known as being more polite and wanting to have discussions outside of business before you actually start talking about what's happening, and what you want to get done. But there's similarities, and the language again is something that helps cut through. Are open to business. All of them are friendly. All of them are looking before they get down into, and this is generally speaking, before they get down into business.
Great, thank you. And as we look at Africa growing, the East African community is obviously one big part of what is forming into the African Continental Free Trade Area. And so we have to understand that a lot of the regional trade blocs are coming together under one common market that is being directed by the African Union. And we are looking at Africa coming together as it already is a formal common market with 54 countries, and within the many years it will take to form all the protocols to develop everything, it'll become something similar to the European Union or maybe the European Economic Community, which was a precursor to the European Union. I don't think that Africa will be, they haven't missed a lot of the lessons that Europe has had to learn through over politicizing their environment. So it's going to be more of an economic union. But this common market is the largest by geography, the largest by population, and the largest by number of countries. So the African Continental Free Trade Area, which the East African community is part of, is going to become more and more important as each African market comes together. But I thought that in discussions about the EAC that we would talk about the African Continental Free Trade Area, because it's something that we all have to be aware of. And I actually believe that I think Somalia has ratified this. So there's only a couple of countries that have not ratified it, and it's been in operation since 2021. So there's a lot of things happening in terms of the protocols. The only country that has not joined it is Eritrea, and they're not really an important market to speak. So um, we're looking at the market overall as developing very quickly, as we indicated, as we were talking about some of the attributes, and we'd like to use Kenya as a leading example for what is happening in East Africa right now. So from on the ground there in Nairobi, Faith, maybe you can tell us about through the next slides some of the developments that are happening in the grocery stores, in online food delivery, in food services. So I'll be advancing the slides at your request, and then we can let's hear your knowledge about the market there.
Great, thanks, Richard. Yeah, so Kenya is really growing. Kenya is becoming more and more developed, more and more open to business. And so just looking at the growth of formalized grocery shop, picture at the bottom is an which is what we would call here just going to the market, but some of you would probably know it as an open air market. And those are still around, but we are now slowly the growth of now formalized shopping. So your top left, if you're looking at your screen, is one of the largest retail stores, which is for some of you may have heard of it, and they are now I think getting into double digits in terms of the number of stores they've opened. They have over 15 stores in the country, and so the grocery retail stores sales are growing, and they grew in 2022 to 11%, and I expect it to grow at 10% on a compound annual growth rate between 2022 and 2027. And the portion of that in terms of US processed food exports to Kenya was 5.6 million in 2022. I think it's gone slightly higher in 2023, which ranks it about 7th in sub-Saharan Africa. So, and represented a growth of 32%. So we're seeing in terms of grocery retail sales, you can move to the next slide, Richard. We're seeing a lot of growth, even when it comes to online delivery services. It's a sector that's growing very quickly. 5 years ago, I wouldn't be able to pick up the phone and have my groceries delivered on time and accurately. 5 online delivery services. Some of those are coming from the retail stores, and some are just, apps like Uber Eats. Glovo is another online delivery service, and they don't just cover groceries. So theirs is also spread out. And so the Post in Nairobi reports that the landscape in terms of Kenya's retail is a mix of the open air market, which is the more traditional one, and the more informal one, to the more formalized, grocery store. So we have a bit of it's a mix of both, and I think also that cuts across to the other East African countries. You have a mix of that informal open air markets and your more formal grocery stores, and also because of the demographics of the country, you do have and also the urban and rural divide. You still have people that will go to the open air markets, but then also because a lot of the countries in the region are seeing an increase in the number of expatriates that are now coming and settling in the countries, and so the need for the more formalized retail services is what's also pushing this growth. And so it's prompted a lot of these retailers to partner with these online delivery services or to come up with some of their own. Next slide. Yeah, and we're seeing the food services sector growing quickly. In fact, just 10 minutes from my house, there's a huge sign of a Papa John's, a new Papa John's that's being built, and I'm waiting anxiously for that to open. I think they have already opened a number of restaurants, and this is one that's coming to this side of town. But we're seeing a lot of American fast food chain outlets. We have KFC, Subway, Domino's, Cold Stone, Papa John's that are opening up in the country, and it's not just one, right? So we're seeing a number of these all around the country. We also have international hotel brands. The Marriott just opened, I think, what is now the best hotel, which is part of the GTC, which just opened last year, and is now, I think, one of the best, if not the top hotels, not just in Kenya, but in the region. And so Kempinski, which are high level international brands, where we had when dignitaries come, that's where they would stay. And so Nairobi is growing in terms of its role in doing business and conferencing. We're seeing a lot of expos that usually happen every year are now moving to twice a year. A lot of the food expos, agricultural trade shows, having coming once or twice a year, and a lot of them are now being based in Nairobi, but that's also just because of the accessibility in terms of also just flights, in terms of it being, it's the location of the country is very central. And so that's part of the growth. And next slide. Yeah, so I think East Africa is predominantly a Christian region, with the exception of Somalia. But we are seeing that there is a large majority of Muslims and of Islam religion that's happening in most hotels now, most restaurants. Even just your typical butcheries are now having to have halal certifications. And so that's something to be aware of. Having that halal requirement certifications is just something that is good to just do regardless of which country you're going in, just because of the majority in terms of just because of the population, the Islamic population or the Muslim population that's growing. But I think also just generally with this younger population, we are seeing even those that are not Muslim or they also are because of animal rights, but also just because of the influence, I think, from the exposure that they are receiving. A lot of the younger population are actually looking and eating at places where they will first of all ask if it's halal. So I think it's something that you need to ensure that products match the market demands, and having that certification would go a long way. Next slide. So when it comes to logistics and cold storage, so large ports and grocery retails, they do have adequate cold storage facilities. But I think it's when it comes to transportation, I think it's one of the areas that is growing. It's a sector in terms of having products that require cold storage. It does drive up the cost a bit when it comes to logistics, and it's always, I think, wise to ensure that the potential business partner or the logistics or warehousing it has the ability to be able to cater for the products that do require cold storage. But a number of the large retailers, there are about 5 in Nairobi or in Kenya, and some of them actually are also in the neighboring countries. They do have the cold storage facility, and that's something that's growing within the region. Next slide.
Okay, so thank you very much, Faith. I think that what Faith has indicated is that Kenya is a very strong starter country for a lot of products coming in. It's well established, it's developed already, and what we're seeing is that Kenya is acting as a launch pad into the rest of the region. And so if you look at, for example, even just the electricity coverage here in this in this thing, it shows that Kenya has a very well developed electricity grid, and the other countries around it are not even close to what Kenya has. And this is a relative um, illustration of what is happening. But as we're seeing things happening in Kenya, we know that Kenya has provided that foothold for a lot of the rest of East Africa, and that what is happening in Kenya will follow into other countries. Is that a correct assessment, Faith?
Yeah, definitely. And the government also plans to get that to 100%. A lot of the Kenya also does pride itself in terms of being one of the countries that promotes renewables, which makes up
Mhm.
majority in terms of generation of the electricity does come from renewables,
Yeah.
and also now beginning um, to sell to the neighboring countries and also to help them generate one of the leading generating, well, the Kenya
Mhm.
generating electricity company is now helping Ethiopia in terms of just harnessing that power. And so yes, it is a reflection because in infrastructure that contributes to it being the hub to which products land and then go into the neighboring countries.
Mhm. Great. And so what we're seeing is that there's certain development nodes that are already developed and they act as distribution hubs. And Nairobi is really right now the key for East Africa. Quite often people will look at Nairobi as a regional distribution hub for more than just Kenya, of course. And so we want to illustrate that and make sure that that's understood. But that other countries are growing very quickly. And so we're seeing, for example, that Rwanda, although it seems to be a little island in the middle of Africa there, it's growing very fast, and it is developing at a growth rate of about 8%. And they tend to have a very fast uptake of a lot of things. Tanzania, Dar es Salaam, a very developed city, and does act as a distribution hub for parts of East Africa as well. So we're looking at a region that, if you get in, you're going to be part of a much bigger growth stream. It's not an undeveloped market. It's a place where everything is already started, it's already moving, and the ability for American exporters to come in and have a long run in a fast growing market is there for you with the right partners. So, just very quickly, we talked a bit about Swahili and English. How easy is it to use English as a business language in East Africa?
Oh, it's very easy. It's the national language for most of the countries in the region. So that's how business is done. That's how businesses operate. So very easy.
Mhm. That's right. You go to Kenya, and me with my Canadian accent, I would say that a lot of Kenyans speak English a lot better than me. So I think we're at a place where English is well and easily understood. So if you come in as an American, you should feel very comfortable. And what about the law, based in the historical antecedents and contract law particularly? When you're creating a law with the distributor, creating a contract with the distributor, would an American easily understand these things?
Yeah, I mean, the history obviously is comes from the influence, sorry, it comes from British, obviously, because of the history of the country, but it's when it comes to doing contracts, we have a lot of the big law firms that are actually have offices here in Nairobi, and it is very easy for an American company to be able to understand to set up a contract between with a distributor or an importer who they're looking to work with and have that held and binding and as a security. So
Hmm.
it's not something that is fleeting. In fact, the judiciary, I think, is actually one office that I think is ensures, that some of these contract agreements are held and followed to the letter.
Hmm. So the legal system, the way contracts are written, and also the way they're negotiated is very similar to American norms. Not completely the same, but similar enough that there's enough to have a really good commonality. Is that a right statement?
Yes, correct.
Okay, well, thanks, Faith. Very quickly, going along with the demographics is the importance of the youth culture. And we have to understand that what is going on in the youth culture is very, very important to what will be happening in the country as a whole. And just as the United States went through a big demographic shift in the 60s and 70s with all the young people, and we saw that haircuts went from very short in 1964 to very long by 1969, 1970. If you lived through that era like I did as a kid, we saw big cultural shifts, and that was driven by the youth culture. And we're seeing similar things happening with the youth culture in Africa, although in a very different kind of direction. And so I'll make a few comments, and then I'd like Faith maybe to say a few things. But the youth culture is really driving a lot of the business culture these days, and it's driving it in areas that are making it not more difficult, but easier for American companies to come in and understand the market. And the first thing that we're seeing is that the youth culture is very connected to online connectivity. They know what's happening globally. They're understanding what's going on in other markets because they're very curious about these markets, and they have access to that knowledge. Just as our friends in SUSTA, you could have access to other markets around the world. They are very keenly interested in the digital connection, and it's part of their lifestyle and their driving knowledge to become and part of the global middle class. I really think that there is a keen move to work hard to attain, and that is really part of the African youth culture. Right now, very quickly, is that um, in Africa, we're seeing a very fast uptake for not just people using the internet, but people becoming part of the digital generation. And Kenya is one of the fastest growing markets for uh, for businesses developing startups and even companies coming in and setting up inside Africa to create business. And we're seeing that right now we have growth rates in the digital sector of almost 13%. And by 2050, they're looking at maybe 15% in this study. We're seeing Rwanda is not far behind, but Africa as a whole is an important hub for development because it's got so many young people. There's a lot of creativity, and this is a big important move that we're seeing. So that connectivity isn't simply people using the internet, but it's people getting involved in the digital world and starting to lead the digital world by developing companies that are involved in it. The other thing that's really important that we're seeing in the African youth culture is a real abhorrence to corruption. And people that think about the uh, some of the stereotypes of Africa, they might be led to think that Africa is a very that there's a lot of corruption, but it's going to depend on the place, it's going to depend on the people. And generally, what is being recognized in the youth culture and how they're doing business is that we have a real abhorrence to corruption. And this is because they see the value of creating business, doing the work as an outpouring of what they know on the merit, on their education, on creating a product of excellence and being able to sell that. And so this is being reflected back into the business culture. And so people who are typically in their mid 30s or under have a very different way of approaching business than people who are maybe 60 or over and running a business. And this is something that you have to keep in mind as an American business coming in, that there is a difference between those older managers and the younger managers, and the people that own a company who are older, much older, and those who are much younger. And so you're going to get it's actually a difference that is bigger than you would encounter in the United States. And so I want to bring this to your attention and let you understand that the other thing that you need to know about the youth culture is that they generally have a very high regard for the United States. And there was a study done, and you see that China was ranked just slightly higher than the United States. The United Kingdom came in at 80, but those three countries were the top ones. And then they regarded other African countries as about 80. So you can see that Russia is sort of far behind, that they're perceived as slightly more negative than even Americans. So America has a very high regard in the youth culture, and it's something that is generally well recognized. And if you there have been studies that have indicated, if you were to travel to a country for the first time, where would you go? And those studies have indicated that 80% of young Africans would indicate they would like to travel to the United States. And so I think that Chinese business is perceived as relatively positive in this study, but I think that the affiliation with American culture is much stronger than Chinese culture. The Chinese have to battle to get anybody to speak their language, of course, and so there is a real filial feeling for working with Americans, and that's something that is very positively in your court as an American exporter. Faith, do you have any comments over those last couple of slides?
Yeah, I think I would agree. The the younger population is really speaking up, I guess, also a lot bolder than grandparents or parents. And so because of that, speaking up against, corruption or things like financial inequality or different things like that. We've seen some movements even in the past couple of months here in Kenya and in Uganda as well, where the young people were just, speaking up against some of the things that I think older generations would have just, and so because of that, I think doing business, because this is the future of the region, doing business is definitely going to become, it's already good, but it's definitely going to become better.
Mm-hmm.
Honesty and transparency as well.
Thanks, Faith. So just in a quick summary, we have a region with a relatively large population and very fast economic growth, which is being um, um, transferred as individuals who have more buying power for their households. So this is a really key thing about the East African market. The next thing is that the market, because of its online connectivity, is demand is converging with U.S. brands and tastes, and we're seeing that with American restaurants coming in, with hotels, with the way that business is being conducted and developed in terms of um, the types of foods that are being bought, the way it's being bought, the way the food service industry is operating. So we're seeing that working very closely, and we're seeing really that this is something that has started and that the market has a lot more potential for. There's a youth-driven demographic, which is very key to understanding things, but this is very positive for American exporters. And the business culture, as we get older and as years go by, what those young people are doing now in their entrepreneurial flair is going to be more and more evident um, in Africa. And I would also say that, I was in a conference in Rwanda with there was about 3,000, maybe 2,500 people in a conference room, and most of them were business owners. And I would say that a good 80% of them were 35 and less. So it was an interesting um, view of what Africa looks like from a business perspective. The older people, yes, they control a lot of the resources, but the younger people are the ones that are out there pushing for new business and creating new things, and a lot of them are being successful. So do keep that in mind. And as you go ahead, you're going to find people that are looking to develop ties with the United States um, and other countries that really have a close filial tie to you. And then the other thing is they're very creative. There's a lot of digital connection to that, and young people are generally very innovative, and this is what we're seeing as well. Keep in mind, too, that the African Continental Free Trade Area is developing into the world's largest common market, and it will be, by the end of this century, the African market will be far bigger than the Chinese market in terms of numbers of people and likely in terms of economy. So we're headed in the right direction. It's going to take time to get there. And of course, well, English is spoken, a bit of Swahili will get you very far. So get out a little phrase book of Swahili greetings and thank yous and all of those sorts of things, and know a few turns of phrase, and you'll become a little bit more respected in your business meetings. It's always a good thing. So just want to point those things out, and then as we go forward on this presentation, which you will have access to, we put the country slides, which I'm not going to go into because it doesn't really, we're not here to recite a lot of statistics, but you can read those statistics, and Danielle will have them on the slides availability for you. So I'm going to stop sharing right now. And if you have any questions to entertain, then we'll bring them up right now. I see we've got a couple.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you. Great presentation, guys. Yeah, why don't I'll read out the questions and you guys can decide who is best to answer. The first one is, what is the potential for American craft distilled spirits in the region? Are spirits imports direct or through third-party countries?
Should I take that one?
Yeah, Faith, please. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, I think we just touched on the middle the growth of the middle class. So because of that, for middle and upper income consumers, they're moving away from your standard local unpackaged and artisanal spirits, and are speaking and are looking for more imported premium brands. So other than US whiskey and tequila, vodka flavored brandy and cognac. So people are demonstrating a preference for sophisticated and important. So the competition for US distilled spirits currently in the region, just generally speaking, is from UK, South Africa, and France. But the prospects for US spirit sales, from what we're seeing, remains very strong. US spirits particularly are widely available in major cities in the region. But because a large amount of them are transshipped through Europe or UAEs, it's not reflected in the trade data, but there actually is demand, and that's one of the sectors. Alcoholic beverages, spirits is one of the sectors that we are seeing growth in terms of imports coming in from the US. So maybe a point on that is a US supplier who could consolidate fragmented demands can reduce their transaction costs and potentially become more competitive when it comes to distilled spirits.
All right, next question. We are a broker and rely on distributors and importers contacting us for products. We have little to no inquiries from African companies. Is there a list of distributors, especially in Kenya, that we could use to start contacting and marketing to?
So part of our services with SUSTA is to assist companies to find those buyers. And that's a key component for all of the overseas offices that SUSTA maintains around the world. And maybe Danielle, if you want to point that out, but what we do in Africa, as the other ones do, is they look for the key companies that are the best qualified for you, and then they shortlist them and help to filter those companies on your behalf. So you don't have to be reactive to people coming to you. We give you the list of potentially the best ones in country or the region that we're assisting with. And so maybe just as a point of administration, Danielle, if you could
Yeah.
discuss some of that.
Yep. So if you go to our website and you click on events, and it'll take you to the main event page, but you have to click on this expert education tab here. That's where you found the webinar most likely. And if you scroll down, these are the consultations with all of our consultants based in foreign markets. So you'll see, India, China, Hong Kong, Canada, Europe, and so on. You can register for a consultation with our African consultants, Richard and Faith. And, depending on which country, they'll get the right person to speak with you. But this would be the first step, just in terms of they need to figure out, what your questions are and what kind of products you have before figuring out the best next step. So that is how I recommend moving forward. Do you have anything to add?
No, that's perfect.
Okay, great.
Great.
Okay, next question. Price has been an issue when we have had inquiries from Africa, especially when competing against Chinese and Indian economies. Do you have any suggestions for comparing quality of US product versus those from China and India, which tend to be much less expensive, but also have questionable quality?
Well, that's the whole point of it. Even in the United States, you're going to have the same questions, and you're going to have imports from everywhere around the world, and you've got to be competitive. But American exporters typically have a very strong ability to produce high quality goods or goods that are destined specifically for the tastes of the markets involved. And this is really where American companies can come in and do well. High quality, not worried about the price, but focused on differentiation. And so this is why we might see two generic commodities, one from further away, one from closer, with a global price attached to it. The American exporter may not get the business. But if it's highly differentiated and it's organized to a specific market niche, we're seeing we're seeing a lot of growth in the market, just as our presentation indicated, and as our own studies have shown that there is a growing market for American goods, and American food exports into Africa are growing. So yes, we understand that there is a price differentiation between some of the less expensive producing countries, but I would also say that people are looking for something different, something better, and something that differentiates their lifestyle. Faith, do you have any comments?
Yeah, I think I mean at the end of the day, the quality of the product will speak for itself, right? So if that's and back to Richard's point of people in the region and just generally speaking, appreciating and acknowledging that a lot of the products that come out of the US are quality brands. And so moving away from just wanting things that are cheaper to appreciating the quality of the product. And so that's a legitimate concern, and that's something that does come up. But to Richard's point, if your product is quality, if it's niche, if it stands out from sort of the mass market, then you do have there definitely is opportunity here.
So our message for you today
Hmm.
is get into the East African market, because in 20 years, your employees are going to thank you and thank you and thank you. We've got a big market that has more people than the United States. It's one of the fastest growing markets in the world. It is keenly interested in working with Americans. It has an ease of doing business that makes it relatively one of the easiest markets to enter in the world. And the people are very welcoming. The hospitality you will discover in East Africa is fantastic. There's places to visit there that are more than world class. Visiting the Serengeti parks, visiting the Zanzibar Islands, going into the lakes, visiting the gorillas in Rwanda. Make it part of your life adventure and find some distributors, and looking forward to helping you out later on. And Faith, any last words?
Yeah, no, thank you. The opportunity is here. I mean, if you're looking at potential, if you're looking at growth, we've explained that this is where you need to be looking for your business for your next 5 to 10 year plans. So we're here to help.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. That was very interesting, a huge market, and we're excited to be supported by you all as our companies explore East Africa and really all of Africa. So, thank you for your time today. And I was thinking maybe to close out, you could say goodbye in Swahili.
Richard, just joking. Kwaheri. You say kwaheri.
Okay, see,
Kwaheri.
I like it.
Yeah.
All right. I will upload the recording of today's webinar as well as the PDF of the presentation to our website, and I'll send you all an email once that is done. And I'll also send the link to the consultations if you're interested in setting something up with the team at Zircom. Thank you all so much.
Thanks, Danielle.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.